The story of ourselves changes when we start saying, yes, but what about the female? What if she's not a side character? What if she's in the center of the story? What does that do to how we change our questions?
That's Cat Bohannon, researcher, author, and poet. Her PhD explores the evolution of narrative and cognition, while her first book, Eve, reveals how the female body has shaped 200 million years of evolution, reclaiming a lost history from dominant male narratives. In this episode, Cat discusses some of the content in Eve and challenges long-standing ideas about the human body. This talk was recorded in our theatre last month.
So we're going to do a little bit of sci-fi. I'm going to start off nice and dirty with a clip from the film Prometheus from Ridley Scott. It is a prequel to the classic Alien. Okay, so that means that you know that the main character here, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, nothing good is going to happen to her. You understand this going in. This particular moment of awful is when she has been impregnated with a vicious alien squid, as you do, and she wants a perfectly reasonable thing to happen. I'll just play.
Emergency procedures initiated. Please verbally state the nature of your injury.
I need cesarean.
Error. This med pod is calibrated for male patients only and does not offer the procedure you have requested. Please seek medical assistance elsewhere.
Cool. So what follows this scene is very gory and involves her basically giving herself a C-section with some lasers and some staples, and she stumbles off to more delightful horrors. Thank you, Ridley Scott. But as I'm sitting in this theater, a PhD student at Columbia University, I hear a woman in the row behind me say, "Shit, who does that?" Yeah, who does that? Who sends a multi-trillion-dollar expedition into space and forgets to make sure that the medical equipment works on, I don't know, women? Oh, but I was a PhD student at Columbia University, and it just so happened that I was like, oh, that's us. Actually, that's us. That's pretty much you and me and everyone in this room right now. In fact, if you are a person with ovaries, you are already Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, less with the squid, but generally speaking, yeah, because there is such a thing as the male norm. Right, so for decades in biology and the biomedical sciences, we were only studying males. You might not have known this. This was true in rats, this was true in pig and dog and non-human primate, basically unless you wanted to know something specific about an ovary, or about a uterus, or about some other she-specific lady bits, right? You were only using male subjects. And that's because, in this case, it wasn't because of sexism necessarily. There is sexism, but in this case, it was good science run amok, because there's such a thing as the estrous cycle, okay? You and I might call it the menstrual cycle. It is when any given mammal who is female goes through an ovulatory process, okay? So you have this cascade of hormones that's going up, going down, differs a bit species to species, but they all usually go through this. And the thing that you might not know is that nearly every tissue in your body has sex hormone receptors. Now, they're differently distributed. Males have a different pattern, females have a different pattern. They're differently distributed across different tissue types, which we only are starting to know now because we're actually finally studying sex differences, but we'll get to that. So we don't entirely know how it all works. We definitely didn't know then, and so the general consensus was, it's not like anyone had a meeting, very serious meeting, like at the RI about this, but the general consensus was like, okay, we are studying males, and they are going to be the model, unless we specifically want to know something about females. Meanwhile, in biomedicine, which is to say medical science, for a very long time, we were also only studying males, which definitely sounds crazy, doesn't it? Like, I exist and have medicine sometimes, right? Just thought maybe, no. So the idea was basically this. We didn't want to screw up babies, because there was such a thing as thalidomide. So I won't get into the specifics, but basically we kind of accidentally, sort of, maybe actually screwed up a bunch of unborn babies by giving females certain kinds of medicine, and we realized that was bad. And so to avoid said bad, we had a major victory at the FDA back in, I think it was the 70s? Yeah. So don't include females of reproductive age in your clinical trial unless you have a damn good reason. Because that chick might get pregnant or be pregnant or stop being pregnant or something. Okay, so no with the pregnancy, nobody with a uterus, cool. So reproductive age is, let's see, the average nowadays is, 11. It's been sliding down lately. When we actually get our first periods, whole other topic, right? But okay, and then to about 50 or so, that's most of our damn lives. Okay, so that meant that females were not simply under-enrolled in clinical trials for medications for decades. They were just flippin' absent. What consequences could there possibly be for such a thing? Just a few. So we started to notice that in 1993, oh, actually, maybe this is a terrible idea. Actually, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we should make females actually be a part of clinical trials. And then in the early aughts and in the last decade or so, the NIH in the United States, the National Institutes of Health, said, ooh, actually definitely include females. But you see, you don't actually have to go back and redo your clinical trials once a drug has been approved for the market. So unless it's massively deleterious, it's gonna probably stay on the market. So a lot of what we've been learning has been through retrospective data, right? Which is to say, we've been guinea pigs, okay? Now, the most obvious one is opioid drugs. This is a common class of pain medication, prescription pain medication. Turns out that female patients tend to need a little bit more to achieve the same level of subjective pain relief than for a male, even if the male is the same size. Right? And it turns out that how the side effects leave the body and at what point at which the effects leave the body, a little bit of a different slope between male and female patients. Totally fine, definitely not fine, because what if you get a prescription? And why are you getting it? Oh, you're in pain, right? And, oh, this isn't giving me quite as much as, or it went away a little sooner than I thought, or how do I, right? And then, so maybe you take it, like maybe you do a little cut with the tab, right? You do like a little more of the dose than you thought, but it's fine, right? Or maybe you take it sooner than the 6-hour interval. Like, what's a half an hour? Why does that matter? Why would, like I'm in pain, can't I? Which is to say, not having adequately tested opioid drugs on female subjects made female patients uniquely vulnerable to certain kinds of addiction patterns. Awesome. So that was great. There's one other thing I do want to tell you about the consequences. Let's see, we wake up a little sooner from anesthesia, we females. Totally great. I'm into that. Normally, it's rare to wake up on the table, okay? Rare to be like in the actual nightmare of vivisection. Not often a thing. Does happen. Horrifying. Does happen. Rare. No, usually what it is that you wake up, what's called emerge from sedation a little bit sooner than the guys, and it means that your anesthetist is like kind of manipulating things on the fly. I mean, I've talked to some anesthetists about this, and they have told me that anesthesia is both an art and a science, right? Because it turns out that every body is a little bit different. You can have your numbers, you can have your readings, but actually everybody's body is going to metabolize a little differently. And an anesthetist's whole job, in fact, is to bring you right to the edge of death, but not quite. Almost to cease, but no. Basically, anesthetists are the edgelords of medicine, okay? Some of you knew what that meant, I'm not going to explain. So what that means is that, it's always going to be a little bit of a something, but they didn't really have guidance until much more recently for how it might differ between the sexes. But let's make it more real for you, because you're not currently having surgery, hopefully, in this room. How many of you have ever experienced insomnia? Okay, a lot, a whole lot. Okay, females are 40% more likely to be diagnosed with insomnia than males. We don't know why, because of that right there, the consequences of not having adequately studied sex differences. But we do know that it is true. We also have commonly prescribed sleep aids to people of all genders, both sexes, right? And there was one very popular one, commonly known as Ambien. We found out, and the FDA finally changed its guidance, that Ambien should be given to females at about half the dose of the male. So not your 10 milligram, but your 5, okay? And we found this out primarily because of clinical data coming in about side effects lasting longer, but also because of car crashes. When do you take a sleep aid, people? You take it the night before you do a thing. Turns out one of the things you do might be driving to work. Okay, so the car crash data was filtering in, and eventually they put the picture together. Oh, females who had taken Ambien the night before were more likely to be in a car crash the next morning than males who had taken or people who hadn't taken at all. And the point at which the FDA finally changed the dosing recommendation, well, it had been on the market for 21 years. I think we can do better. And we are trying to, right? There is good news. That book, that Eve book, would not exist if it weren't for the incredibly hard work of actual thousands of scientists who are diving into the biology of sex differences right now, like literally right now, somewhere in the world, actually in the lab doing the thing. And so I was able to take a lot of these findings and build a kind of big synthesis of what I was able to see, because I saw that things are changing. We are starting to get better guidance for anesthesia. We are finally starting to understand that there might be some sex differences and addiction patterns, and maybe the liver actually has something to do with that. It's not just like lifestyle stuff, right? We're finally starting to build better medicine for people who have different kinds of bodies, including, half of us, which is great. One of the things that I did learn, I'm going to do a little something new for you this week, something I've never done before, because I knew I was coming to the RI and y'all special. So I found a beautiful paper about why it is that females wake up from anesthesia sooner. I'm going to tell you about it, okay? I didn't do this paper, but I read it. And I'm just going to take you on a little thought experiment with me because it's going to be fun. So it turns out that yes, and this paper tested, in human subjects who hadn't had surgery, which is a bit of a confound there, females do wake up sooner, do emerge sooner from standard general anesthesia. Okay, cool. Then it became rat o'clock, right? It was time to go back to our basic rodent models. And what they did is they castrated male and female rats. I'm going to do a little footnote for you. I do this a lot in the book, so we're going to come over here into, this is my footnote now. Okay, and because I want to explain, it does definitely sound like I am obsessed with castration, but no, I'm going to tell you something really, really important about studying sex differences. The thing is that male and female gonads, so that's your testes and your ovaries, I don't know what the hell to call those, anyway, they're in there, right? They both make both types of sex hormones, and it's not the only place in the body where they do. So the testes make a ton of testosterone, usually. Most people who have them are making a ton of testosterone, okay? But it's also true that the adrenal glands are doing that. Not as much, but a bit. Ovaries, totally, until you hit menopause, making a whole lot of various kinds of estrogen, okay? Doing a lot of that. But so's your adipose tissue. Not as much, a little bit less, but adipose tissue in both sexes making some estrogen, which is part of why when female bodies pass the menopause, it ain't like their estrogen zero, okay? Like this is shut down, this has gotten a little sleepy, right? But it turns out that actually the adipose tissue is still producing estrogen, which may be part of why people who have a certain percentage of body fat, not obese, that's a whole level of inflammation, but certain percentage of body fat actually tend to have a little bit more protection health-wise after menopause, right? Because estrogen is now known to be slightly protective against certain kinds of health ailments as we age. Okay, coming out of my footnote, coming back. Okay, where were we? We are castrating rats. Yes. And what happens then is you can control the amount of testosterone in those bodies with injections, right? Because you've taken out the main source of testosterone in the male, and the female, you've gotten that offline, and you're much more close to a baseline, right? So you do your injections, you can control for higher and lower levels. And it turns out that it's not simply that males sleep longer under anesthesia, but it's testosterone modulated. So in the female as well, a higher testosterone level lets them go in at that more male typical slope and emerge more slowly from sedation, okay? So it's a testosterone thing. That's what is helping males not wake up on the surgery table, or at least this is a factor. But it's not the case that testosterone alone gives you the sleepy sleepies, okay? It seems to be that it makes your brain, well, at least the rat brain and potentially yours, more responsive to sleep cues. So I, being, of course, exactly like you, immediately thought of other conditions in which men are known to fall asleep. Can anyone think of one? Oh yeah, come on, say it out loud. When do they fall asleep? When's another case? Well, after an orgasm. So what I did for you good people on Tuesday afternoon is I dug into the scientific literature on post-coital drowsiness. What I wanted to know is if an orgasm in males and females, or maybe just males, I wasn't sure when I started digging in, bumps up your testosterone level. And the answer is, yes, it does. Yes, it does. Not always reliably. It can. It's more like it can in rats, but also in humans, maybe. There was a really lovely study from 1992, actually, of a bunch of couples. This is 1992, so this is definitely cisgender. This is definitely heterosexual couples, okay? So we're not going to get some diversity here. I do not know if they were white. Anyway, so this study, so what they did is they took their a blood draw, and they did their baseline testosterone at the start of an evening, before the meal, the start of the evening, the standard, whatever, and then they did it right before they went to sleep at night. Okay, and those who had had sex in the interim, now this was sex at home, mind you, this was not lab sexing, okay? So this was presumably normal sex scenario for them, whatever that was, they didn't ask. But for those who had had sex before they fell asleep that night, their testosterone level was higher. This was true for males and females. And it was so fascinating to me because I remember that females are 40% more likely to be diagnosed with insomnia. So I could not find a study that tested this exact question. But what I wanted to know is it the case that women would sleep better if the sex were better? Okay, because then you get your bump in testosterone. Also, after an orgasm, you may not know, you also get a bump of melatonin. Think both sexes, okay? And then that means that the brain's gonna respond more nicely to melatonin, and then that means she's gonna be able to fall the hell asleep, which is apparently a problem for us, and maybe not take a sleep aid that would make her more likely to get into a car crash in the morning. So I'm going to move along because the thing is, when I wrote Eve, I didn't just want to know a lot about sex, although sometimes, but not in this specific case, right? No, I wanted to see how the story of ourselves changes when we start saying, yes, but what about the female? Because it wasn't just in direct research, it was also the stories of how we tell ourselves, oh, this is what our evolutionary path was. That what we are is made of where we came from. That's a basic evolutionary principle, right? So if that's the case, well, how we tell the story of ourselves matters, right? So how does the story change when you say, yes, but what about the female? What if she's not a side character? What if she's in the center of the story? What does that do to how we change our questions? How does that shift how we're seeing the data before us? So that was the broader project of the book. So we're going to do just one of the ways in which the story changed. What do you think the most important human invention was? Fire. Very good idea. Yeah, you know what fire is great for? Cooking stuff. We like cooking stuff because of all of the horrific bacteria, especially in meat. You really want to cook meat. Fire was an awesome thing, all right? Comes on kind of late in the game, actually, in the hominin line. Fire isn't a thing that we're doing for a really long time. So maybe it's really good once we have it, but we're still hominins, but we're not having it for like millions of years. Give me another one. What's another good invention? Writing and sewing, both very nice, very nice. I like both of those. Writing is a few thousand years old, and our species is 300,000 years old. We, for the vast majority of our time on Earth, have not been literate in the slightest. Literacy is not a baseline trait of humanity, except for maybe now, but also only in the last few decades has it become a global standard that we're literate. Actually, even in ancient Rome, I can actually tell you, it only ever reached about 10%, and that was mostly clustered in the cities. So literacy, awesome, totally amazing upgrade. I'm into it. Star one for literacy, not so much. Sewing, also a really great technology, totally true. We like to stitch things together. That was true. You had to have things like needles or awls, which took a really, really long time. So as I was looking through, because I had to write a tools chapter, right? Because the book is divided according to the major traits that place us where we are on the taxonomic tree, moving up through evolutionary time from early mammals to the species we are today. So of course I had to have a tools chapter. We're very impressed with our tools, thank you very much. The thing that I wanted to know is like, wait, okay, what the hell is a tool? What a tool is fundamentally an object that we assume has a kind of triangulation, a kind of triangular relationship between the imagined user, whatever creature made the thing or used the thing, right? The proposed tool, a goal right there in the middle, and of course the environment in which both the user and the goal and the tool is all situated. Right? In other words, tool use is all about behavior. And fundamentally, it's really about overcoming a limitation in one's body plan in a given environment in order to achieve a goal. Right? So then the thing you really want to know about the most important human tool, the most important human innovation, is what are the most important bodily limitations that we have, and what are the behaviors then that we can utilize to overcome those bodily limitations, right? And what I found was what most people would call the hard problem. Okay, in evolutionary science, you can have many different things that are not great for you as a species, for whether you're a bird or a frog or what have you, right? And it could be pretty terrible to live with that trait, but so long as it doesn't impede your reproductive success, there's a good chance it's going to stick around. Like, because, evolution, babies over time, kind of how that whole thing works, right? It turns out that the human species sucks at making babies. Actually, all of us. Pretty much all of us, pretty much all of the time. Our pregnancies and births and postpartum recoveries turn out to be, as I horrifically learned, longer and harder and more prone to dangerous and crippling and sometimes deadly complications than they are for most any other primate. It actually completely sucks. Now, squirrel monkeys are a notable exception. When they give birth at term, that baby is 18% of their body weight. For those of you who aren't into math, this is going to be like kind of up to her chin. Like I've seen some pictures, it's kind of up to her chin, and 18% is not counting the fluid, okay, in the womb with that baby. So this is like, a lot of them die, is the point. A lot of them die, we're going to move on, we feel real bad for the squirrel monkey. It turns out, also true of most other mammals, okay? Now, excepting the hyena, who literally gives birth out the middle of a protopenis, which is not cool. It is not cool for the hyena at any moment, and that is what evolution gave her. So it's not that we don't have sympathy for other females that exist in the world, but nonetheless, we have what would be called a hard problem. And in evolution, if you have trouble making babies, I mean, you can limp around on one foot, You can have one weird-ass eye, all right, that only sort of works some of the times. And then there's whatever happens in caves, right? Very strange things can happen to a body, but if you're bad at making babies, well, you are not likely to become a species that has 8 billion members alive at the same time. And we know this. We know something about what that looks like. Here are some example species. All of these species are endangered, and the primary reason they're endangered is because human beings have encroached on their territory and or poaching, which is to say, we're jerks. we're not good stewards of the world and we're trying to do better, right? So it's not just that, though. It's also that they are bad at sex and they are bad at babies. Take the giant panda. The giant panda has largely, in captivity, forgotten how to have sex, which seems like a good thing not to forget. They are lately trying to show them panda porn on television, and it does not get them particularly in the mood, okay? The scientific reasons are that they have kind of an elaborate, like, mating ritual, which involves peeing in different places, and there's, like, territoriality, right? In other words, that you come into the pea-scented territory of a sexy guy, and then now you're in the right patch of bamboo, and it's hot time, right? Like that's your scenario. But just know that the panda, also they basically only eat bamboo, and I hear they're kind of jerks with their handlers. Not very nice. So many different rhino species are endangered, sadly, primarily due to poaching. It is also true that of many rhino species, the male phallus is 2.5 feet long and shaped like a lightning bolt. And then the female has an equally complicated vag structure to match. It is incredibly hard to impregnate a rhino, not only because you're basically trying to upend a car with the right, but it's not just that, it's just that their reproductive systems seem to be a bit sensitive. So even when they do get pregnant, if they manage to survive to term, then also the offspring tend not to thrive. And so it's actually very sad for the rhino. Also, the Sumatran rhino, if I'm remembering right, ovulates in response to sex. So that's challenging in a zoo environment, right? And they've lately had some success with IVF. We should be like these guys. In principle, if we're just looking at our reproductive systems, we should be a curiosity in somebody else's zoo, okay? But we're not. We arrived at 8 billion. Maybe possibly too many, but anyway, we got here, right, is the point. And we certainly didn't do so with a reproductive system that would predict such a thing. What we did do is we invented gynecology. This is Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. God, that's hard to say on stage. She lived 3.2 million years ago, y'all. And the thing to know about Lucy is her pelvis. Okay, so the situation we're in right now is we're trying to squeeze something about the size of a watermelon out of a lemon-sized hole. Formally, this is called the obstetric dilemma, which is a very nice way of saying, oh God, this is awful. Okay? So to make it, again, more real for you, the average first-time human mom giving birth takes about 12 to 16 hours to complete the task, assuming there aren't major complications. That's on average. Yes, it can take more. Sometimes it takes less. That's rare for first-timers, okay? So labor to delivery to you have a baby and you're glad it's over, but you love the kid, but okay. 12 to 16 hours, okay? First-time chimp mom. Same as later chimp mom, actually. On average, top to bottom, it is 30 minutes. We're talking pains, grimace face, doing the monkey, and right? And then baby, 30 minutes on average. There have been cases of longer, right? But this is on average, okay? So basically, she has some pain, sucks for her. She gives birth through her nice roomy hole, okay? Right? Just like luxury, right? And then the placenta comes out and she basically knuckle walks the fuck away. Okay? She's just like, she's chill, is what I'm trying to say. She is unbothered. And that is not our situation at all, obviously. So this is the obstetric dilemma. And the reason that we think Lucy, remember Lucy, had a midwife is that she shared our obstetric dilemma. By estimating the average size of babies at term, which is an estimation of growth rate, by analyzing fossilized pelvises and making some averages, it seemed very likely that she had the need. She had the bodily limitation. She had a given environment in which one needed to make a baby, right? And she had a tool, but in this case, the tool was a behavioral innovation. In this case, the tool was having somebody else help her give birth, which is knowledge that you don't need language to do at first. You can actually get a lot done with monkey see, monkey do, and then monkey grandma teach monkey ma, and then monkey ma teach monkey grandbaby. Like, there's a lot that you can do behaviorally to pass knowledge between generations, whatever tool use you might be looking at. Presumably, this would also have been true of Australopithecines, who pretty sure did not have language. Good communication, sociality, very smart, not language, right? But the thing you also need to know is that it's not just the bones, y'all. It's also the brains, right? The size of the damn head, right? Which is getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the hominin line. But also importantly, brains are really expensive to build and expensive to maintain as well. One of the theories out there for why our placentas are so invasive, and they penetrate all the way down into mother's bloodstream, is that during the last trimester of human pregnancy, we need to mainline material to that baby in order to build that baby's brain, which is rapidly growing and metabolically expensive during that last trimester. We're also building out a lot of that baby's fat, which is also a thing. That's why newborns are born all chubby and preemies are skinny. So we've got Ardipithecus. She is in my book. She is lovely. She is our upright hominin. She's great. This is about the time when our pelvis goes from out here to here, which is why that pelvic opening is narrowing. That's the theory anyway, right? So you can't hold up an upright body with a pelvis that's kind of like this. Not as effective. The idea is that we had to rotate it, and that better supported the buttock muscles. A huge part of how you are upright is your gluteus maximus, okay? I have a giant muscle here on both sides hauling my back up and connecting to my spine and making me upright. Then we've got Lucy, the Australopithecus. Then we've got Habilis, she's in my book too. And Erectus, she says hi, she's great. And then we go up and through a Neanderthalensis and Sapiens. The head is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So the thing you need to know is there's such a thing as an MVP, a minimum viable population. What is humanity known for? We're known for being kind of everywhere, right? Kind of actually all over the damn planet, right? Not something you would think would be easy to do with an inherently buggy reproductive system, right? So, minimum viable population. The general estimate, if we needed, let's say we needed to build a starship, okay? Let's say we had an incredibly, probably bad idea to go to another star. We shouldn't do that. And maybe populate another planet, probably should work on climate change. But let's say we did, okay? How many people would need to be on board that spaceship so that we wouldn't degenerate into the 11-toed wonder? Because, the sexing and the generations and the what have you and the supporting and the random sprees of death that naturally come with just being alive, like infectious agents and diseases. What would we actually need? The one recent estimate out of Harvard was 40,000 individuals. Not a small starship. Of those, only 23,000 are called effective members. By effective, what they mean is who's actually having sex and making the babies. So 23,000 out of 40,000 making the generation. However, unfortunately, the best estimate we have right now for the initial migration into the Levant from Africa is 1,500 to 2,000 individuals. Bit smaller, not 40,000. So if you have a buggy reproductive system and you are encountering a new environment, isn't it impressive? We've been freaking everywhere. Look at this thing, right? Like we're going up, and we kept going back and forth, and then we did some admixture in Africa, and we had sex with some Neanderthals, some of us, not all of us, and there was a whole situation. But nonetheless, we kept moving around. And each time we hopped into our new environment, it was really more of a long slog and a lot of people died, we were in a new challenge, right? Different food patterns are gonna happen, different seasonality of stuff, different exciting ways that you could totally die, right? And try and make a bunch of babies difficultly, because of course what you do is you either go and you establish your new population, you somehow get yourself to an MVP in that environment, but your reproductive system is buggy. Oh, but what we have is human-type gynecology, which is not just midwifery. We have a bunch of different medical knowledge at different points in our history. We have ways of up-regulating and down-regulating our fertility. in fact. Maybe we cluster our births kind of towards the beginning of our 20s if we're lucky enough to live that long, right? And then we stretch it out and we do some allo-parenting, and everyone helps raise those kids. Maybe we do what hunter-gatherers do now. Most extant hunter-gatherer populations tend to have babies about 4 to 6 years apart. In other words, in each given environment, a new reproductive strategy would have helped us survive and thrive better than not doing anything, just having a lot of sex and crossing our damn fingers. Right? Remember that no one alive today is without gynecology. Many of us are alive without particularly great gynecology. To be clear, there are some situations that should definitely be remedied, right? But it's absolutely true that nearly every human culture, historical and present, has a number of local traditions that effectively work to reduce maternal bleeding, to coordinate the timing of the pushes to go with the contractions, to reduce the risk of infection, even if they don't particularly have a knowledge base around that's what they're doing. You don't gotta know that copper instruments can potentially be bactericidal, but hey, there's fewer people dead, right? You have many traditions that effectively work to keep more female people alive through our crappy reproductive system, which is why I make the claim in the book that our most important invention was not fire or sewing, I did like sewing, or writing, certainly that's recent, or even stone tools exactly. It was gynecology. It's why we're not extinct, more than likely. It's why our species, I would think, in this frame, even came to be, because it came on board before we did. So that's in the tools chapter. But there is something I'm going to close with because I did leave you dangling a little bit at the front of it. So a lot of people have asked me why males should care about what's in my book. If the male body is so well studied, we've established that it is the male norm, we talked about it, right? If male medicine is so oriented towards males, like in other words, if all medicine is oriented towards male models, well, then are they then just supposed to feel pity? They should feel bad for us. I don't know about you, but pity is not a very effective galvanizer. It can be initially. In a lot of social justice movements and a lot of social change, pity initially, that appeal, can be very motivating, but it's brittle. It's brittle and it has an expiration date. So what you need to do is you need to help your listener understand that they in fact do have their own skin in the game. You need to grab them by the chestnuts, okay? So let's talk about longevity. So you may know already that males tend to not live as long as females, and that this has actually been true. This is just in the last century or so, historically as well as present. That's just US data. Maybe you want to look at the global data. Actually, globally, this is true as well. We're all, as you can see, on average, living quite a bit longer than in 1950. But there's this gap, this remarkably resilient freaking gap between males and females. And why is that? Well, the male immune system is, in a word, a bit crap, okay? So when males are born, and this is true across many mammalian species, they tend to suffer from more infections. And when they do, depending on infection type, but on average, their prognoses tend to be a bit worse. They also get more cancer. So cancer-ridden, the males. That is true of rat, that is true of dog, monkey, it is true of human. It's just hard, actually. It's just hard to be a dude, turns out, if you're a mammal, right? And whatever dude means. In this case, I'm talking about males. All right, so there are, don't worry, so many things that a male can do in the human species to extend its lifespan, right? How can men live longer? Well, you could do any of these things. All of them are very good advice and supported by sound science. These are the primary things, again, to be clear, that I recommend that you would necessarily do. You could eat healthier. You know what that means. You don't need the specifics, right? Your fish and chips, probably not. Not quite as great. Okay, you should sleep more. Sleep is huge. We've talked about sleep, haven't we? You should manage your stress. You should get checkups. Actually, if you can get medicine, do it. I hear the NHS is complicated, but kind of great. We don't have one, okay? In the United States, we just go bankrupt if we're not rich, okay? Right, so you could, actually, Dr. Rich Miller, a prominent gerontologist, has told me you could make friends. Adding friends, on average, adds 7 years to your freaking life, okay? 7 years, that's huge. Now, let's be honest though, all of these are hard to implement and even harder to maintain. And with the friends, maybe there's a reason you don't have friends. Like if you're going from 0 to friends as a whole adult person, you have some history there. Get a therapist, okay? There is one thing you can do to extend your lifespan. I do not recommend it. Don't try this at home. Please be clear, don't try this at home. But across many male mammals, you can castrate them. Not kidding, you can cut off their balls. It works in rodent of all types. It works in dog. It adds about 1.5 years to a domestic dog's life. It works in non-human primate of many types. It works in freaking fruit fly. Okay, so this is an evolutionarily conserved beyond even down past mammal. It's been a while since we've been related to fruit fly, people. Okay, and you do it with very specific tweezers, if you're wondering. That's how I asked, and that's what they told me, specific tweezers. We're gonna come back to the fly, all right? But the thing is that we don't know exactly why, okay? We do know in human that the data is mixed, but we do have some. Like, I haven't asked guys to cut off their balls, okay? Like, I don't have a lab that's just waiting. No, that's not my situation, right? But we do have some historical data. We do know of present-day data that it's a common treatment for men with testicular cancer, okay? The removal of the testicles, because in many cases what you want to do is you want to downregulate that testosterone because that's part of a treatment plan in many cases. However, once you already have cancer, bit of a freaking confound, okay? So it's hard to interpret mortality data there. Historically, we do know that there have been a number of traditions of eunuchs. Can be hard to interpret the data, but they do exist. The Korean Imperial Court, there's some problems with this study, but the Korean Imperial Court did have eunuchs, and they kept very good medical records. There were institutionalized men in the middle of the 20th century who were castrated because eugenics was awful. We should never do that again, right? But they had very good medical records. Maybe some complications from TB. Data's still out. And there was a Central Asian tradition too. In most of these cases, again, hard to interpret the data, don't try this at home. But in most of these cases, the males were living longer, relatively healthier lives than their regularly bald peers. Their heart measures were better. In many cases, they seemed to have better peripheral vascular response when it was tested. It seemed to be the case that many of their systems looked like they were aging more slowly, right? Now, so why is this? And the answer is we don't know, because we weren't studying sex differences until a few decades ago, but we're finally trying to get on it. And this is the actual future of gerontology, trying to figure out that sex longevity gap, right? Figuring out what the mechanisms are. We know some things. We know in the fruit fly, for example, that when you castrate a male fruit fly, yes, he will live longer, but also there are some features of his gut that have shifted. Some genes are differently expressed. His metabolism has been a little bit shifted. So maybe it's a gut story. Not really sure. I should let you know, however, that it is also true that the male fruit fly, his testicles are 11% of his body weight. So we don't actually know why the fruit fly lives longer when he's been castrated. Maybe he's just less tired. It's hard to be 11% balls. But the thing that we know, again, don't try this at home. The thing that we know is that males do in fact have skin in the game when it comes to building better models of sex differences in our model species. Because it turns out that the male mammal, in many ways, is actually the slightly more vulnerable organism, right? and also that men deserve better from the NHS than a mass castration plan.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. RI Science podcast episodes are released on the last Wednesday of every month. In the meantime, you can explore more science on our YouTube channel or browse our new autumn programme on our website, rigb.org.